Hello and welcome back to the Keepsake Box series, which has been kindly sponsored by Axminster Tools. In this video, we are going to be doing the, quite frankly, terrifying task of separating the lid. Let's get stuck into it. So in the Toolbox project, we did this by running a router around the outside of the box and then finishing it off with a Ryoba saw. But in this case, because it's a limited tools project, we're not going to use any power tools whatsoever, and instead do it with a plough plane and a saw. You can do this part with just a saw, but to be honest, doing it with a plough plane just reduces your risk of anything going wrong. But that said, the technique I'm going to show you to separate this lid and finish it off with the saw will be the same technique you would use if you were to do this with just a saw. So the lid is going to be separated right in the middle of this larger tail here, and so I'll just measure the center point of that with a ruler and then get my plough plane set up to cut right in the middle of that. So because we're going to be separating a joint here, it's going to be possible for me to plane along this face with the plough plane, but coming across this way is going to mean that I need to go through the end grain of this tail, and I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be possible with this. So I'll give it a go, but if not, I am just going to have to slice across this entire face with the saw, which I will show you in a later process. But for now, we'll just focus on these faces. And when I do this, I start the plane at the end and will gradually increase the length of the shavings as I go. The reason I do this is because if I start all the way back here, I've got all this room for it to start tracking the grain, and by the time I get to the end, I could be way off. Whereas if I just do a small bit to start with and then move it back and increase it, it then falls into the groove that it cut previously, and it's much more likely to stay on track. That said, I am working with some horrible grain direction here, but I can't really do anything about it, because otherwise I'm going to have to reference off the bottom of the box, and that might result in some inaccuracies. But again, sticking with these short shavings just means that if there is any tear out, at least it's contained within the groove that's going to get removed. So I think this is about as far as I'm going to get before the fence of this plough plane starts intruding on the slightly proud lid. But to be honest, this is enough. A groove of this depth should be just about deep enough to help us track the saw, because again, like I said before in the series, the saw is going to follow the path of least resistance. And so if we have a groove of this depth on the top and the bottom, and we cut from this face, it's going to track down both of those grooves, hopefully. So we'll start on the other side now. Right, let's see what this does. So just to reiterate, the reason we're not doing this is because I'm going to be hitting end grain at the end, and there is a high chance of it breaking out. But because I've already got a groove on these faces, any breakout on that end grain should hopefully be contained within that groove. So we're going to figure this out very quickly. Okay. It seems to be doing it. I've just got to be really careful not to track off course and accidentally hit any of this stuff that I'm trying to keep. Okay, so next, it's time for the moment of truth, and that is separating the lid. Now this job will be a lot easier than expected, because I didn't expect to be able to get across these short sides so easily with the plough plane, but we still got to be careful. So in order to separate this material, we're going to need to slice down from the top. And while this groove will act as a path of least resistance when it's sort of tracking down, because it will both follow this one on the front and on the back, we can actually take it a step further by creating a path of least resistance with the saw itself. And this is the technique you'll use if you haven't gone ahead and pre-grooved the outside, and is actually something that we already kind of covered earlier on in the series. So if I get this saw located in the center of the groove and just start that cut and get it engaged, just use nice light pressure on it to get it started. And as we do so, we're going to lower the saw like this and start cutting down this face. And as I said before, this is where you can kind of bend the saw in order to start steering it down this line. Now, we're not going to be able to get too far in one hit, because we are going to start needing to remove material from the back and the top in order to do so. But if you just keep doing this, In addition to having a groove on the front and the back, you'll also have a saw kerf running down the middle of it that will act as the path of least resistance. So then this groove basically becomes, you know, just a emergency path of least resistance. So there we go, we're at about 45 degrees on that face. Spin it round now and do the same here. Just when you're doing this, watch out for these teeth at the back because you could still catch just outside of the groove if you're not careful. Okay, we're at 45 degrees there. And so now we've got a saw cut running about that far down the back and that far down the front. And so if we start on the top now and do our usual thing of tracking the line from back to front so that those two saw kerfs on the top meet, let's just do that real quick. Okay, and there we go. The saw is now engaged in both of those cuts. We can trust that as long as we're not applying too much force on that saw, if we just let it do its thing, it is going to follow those two saw kerfs on the front and back. And so even without those saw kerfs, in theory, this is what it's going to do with the groove. But those saw kerfs just help keep this saw in the middle of that groove so you don't start hitting the outer walls. And like I said, this is the technique you're going to use if you don't have the groove. You're just going to track it down the front about an inch or two with the saw and then do the same on the back and then just slice away at the top and you'll be surprised how easily it follows those lines. Okay, so we've broken through that side now. So I'm really going to reduce the pressure because I don't want excessive breakout on that inside face. And I'm pretty sure I've just hit the bottom of my 45 degree lines. And so because I've ran out of saw kerf to follow, we'll just start it again now. And we haven't got to worry too much about this top edge now because it's already following the kerf that's already there. And at this point, I can literally steer the saw as needed. I can get it really far down this face. Okay, any more than that, I'm going to start hitting the vise. So, other side now. Okay, then we'll just clamp it down for this finishing cut so the lid can fall away freely. Hey. Okay, well that went very well indeed. So we'll just peel off all of this inside tape that was sort of stopping any glue squeeze out from sticking, and then we'll start planing down the top and bottom of this lid to get them seamless. Right, so in order to plane this flush, to start with, I'm just going to hog off the majority of this leftover material with the block plane, but then when it comes to actually flattening it in order to achieve a seamless fit, I'm going to switch to the bench plane. But before I do either of those, I just want to figure out what the actual direction of the grain is, because I don't want to cause any tear out on this finished face. And I can sort of do that by looking at the inside faces here. This one, annoyingly, there's a bump in the middle, so I'm going to have to work from both sides in, potentially, but if it's sensible, I might be able to go from one direction. But whichever way I establish the grain is going, either through checking the grain itself or through actual testing, just going to draw an arrow on the bottom of the box. Remember, this is being covered with felt, so that I can remember which way I need to plane it. Not sure on this one yet, and that one's going that way. And so this way, with those arrows, it just gives you a nice reminder as to which way you should be planing. Again, when it comes to hogging off material, it's not actually that important, but with this larger one, when we're going to be referencing off other walls in order to flatten the other, this is going to be very important. Okay, so we're pretty much there with that. So now we'll switch to the bench plane with a nice fine cut. So again, as I go around these corners, you see I'm just keeping the plane referenced on the side that I've already passed. And eventually this will allow us to get a nice continuous shaving around all of these sides. And so it's basically the same principle with the lid. The only thing I will say is you just got to be careful about the way in which you clamp this, because if I wrench this down in the vise, remember there's no glue in this groove, and so I'm going to be mushing those sides in. But what's more, these joints on the corners, it's not that they're weak, but it's also they're not that strong. You've only actually got 2 gluing faces in this joint remaining. One next to the tail there, which is a nice sort of 90-degree wall, and then this one just above the pin, but that's actually only a 45-degree wall because the rest is taken up by the mitre. Of course, the mitre does give you a little bit of gluing surface as well, but it's mostly end grain, so you're not going to get a lot of strength from that. So whatever method you choose, just try and be conscious of that. If I clamp this end to end, it might be better, but no, it won't fit in my vise. I reckon if I cut a little bit of material to fit in there really snug, when I mush it in the vise, that's going to help keep everything aligned. Because the last thing you want is for this lid to start skewing or, God forbid, break and no longer line up with the box below, which is the whole reason why we went this method of making it a complete thing before separating the lid. If that lid breaks, it's going to be very difficult to get everything back to where it was. Right, and then with that, that is by far the most terrifying part of this entire box complete. I do just want to reiterate, however, please be careful with that lid when you plane it. As a finished product, when it's hinged, it's perfectly structurally sound, but applying skewing forces with a plane or whatever you happen to use when you're flattening it can be something that breaks these corners, or at the very least sort of, you know, skew the box and put it out of alignment with the base. Just be careful with it. Find some sort of secure clamping method like I showed you, or maybe even cut a piece of plywood to fit in there perfectly, just to give it that extra bit of strength it requires while you work on it. But like I said, when it's in the box, it's absolutely fine. But yeah, I'm very happy that's out the way because the rest of the project is pretty smooth sailing from here. In the next video, we'll be hinging the lid, and so I'll see you then.